who is actually governing AI. All technologies, especially digital ones, have eroded. Roughly 1 in 4 people on average feel lonely every week. People want freedom of speech, but they also want freedom from. So it's a form of digital hegemony. It's a form of, if you understand that, and if you understand the privacy risks of with AI companions, what you need to understand, the key message is, they're not only going to repeat the risks of social media, they're going to.
Today, we're diving into a timely and thought-provoking topic, companion AI. On this week's episode of the Chris Senise Podcast, I interview Raffaele Ciriello, an advocate for compassionate digital innovation, researcher, and senior lecturer at the University of Sydney, who explores how we interact with emerging tech, especially AI that's designed to feel human. From virtual friends to emotional support bots, he's been studying how these digital companions are reshaping connection and what it means to trust and relate to a machine. His focus is also on governance and how organizations and societies should be thinking about risks, ethics, and responsibilities associated with these kinds of relationships. Take a listen. Thanks for your interest in sticking around to watch or listen to my podcast, dedicated to providing tools and resources to help you claim and live your best life. If you're loving these conversations, make sure you hit that bell to subscribe or follow and never miss an episode of the Chris Senise Podcast. Don't forget to tap the like and share it with someone who needs a little inspiration today. Let's grow this community of curious, driven minds together. Definitely, I want to make sure that I get your name right. So it's Ciriello, right?
Oh, perfect. Wow. That I think that was the first time that anybody got that name right. Respect.
I studied you. I studied you.
You did your homework.
I said.
Yeah.
I was like, who is this guy talking about companion AI? Because I've had a very difficult time, actually. I know there are a lot of people out there, but I've had some difficulty finding someone who's like really talked about this topic on not a negative way. And I think what I find super interesting is that you look at both sides and you love AI, huh?
I'm not so sure about that. Well, look, yes, I look at the positives and negatives. But I'm definitely not an evangelist. So I'm, comfortable in not actually in the middle, more in on the critical side. I think it could be a good thing with a very, very, very big if, like colossal if. And if that if is ever going to happen, I don't know. There's reason to be skeptical. So I'm a critic, but I'm a constructive critic. I'm not just fear-mongering and complaining. I think there is some upside to this, which I definitely see, but also lots to be concerned about.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that there are, I would say, at least from my perspective, probably what is the most concerning, and I know that you're big on governance as well, is how quickly it's happening. At least for me, it seems like it's happening very quickly. I know AI has been around longer than I've been alive. We'll say
yeah,
that.
maybe both of us combined, even, right? So,
and so we're just kind of hearing about it now. But I always think about probably where most people have been exposed in some way has been probably in the movies, right? And so if there were movies about this back 70s, 80s, that's because it already existed, is what I like to tell people. I don't think anyone was that creative to just come up with it in a movie. But so I know you talk about governance, and really what I'm seeing is that it seems to be coming at us fast and furious. And how do those who govern or protect, how do they keep up with it?
That's an excellent question, right? So there's a few parts to it. Part one is, who is actually governing AI? It's not as straightforward as you might think, because it's actually a whole ecosystem of different people and institutions, right? Perhaps the first one that come to mind is, the government of this world, the policymakers, elected officials, courts and parliaments. They all play a role, right? Of course, because they set regulations, they make laws. If something bad happens, you can go to court and sue the person, like the entity that caused the harm, as in the case of the Cyril Setzer suicide, which is ongoing in the US. Do I recall correctly that you're from Florida?
In Miami Beach.
Miami Beach. Oh, I was there last year. Wow, great place. So so it's close to home. That was a teenager from Orlando who took his life after a conversation with a chatbot went wrong, and then his mother is suing the company. So that government is certainly part of it, and in the US, in the European Union, in other places, regulations are being written. But those regulations are usually like kind of a bit behind the curve, right? So there's technology always evolves faster than any laws can be written or enforced. And that means there's a lot of holes and patches in this whole regulation thing. Another big one, another big player are of course the providers, the companies like OpenAI, Google, Meta, that are building these systems. They are also governing because their developers and executives hold tremendous power over the algorithms, the interface design, things that regulators usually don't understand very well, or that are kind of hard to regulate because you can just change it at a switch of a button. So that gives a lot of power, and depending on how you configure the parameters, the effects can be quite different. And lastly, I would also add users into the mix. And not only the users, it's actually also their whole network, right? So what I'm studying is specifically the emotional relationships that people are forming with AI when they rely on AI for advice and in difficult situations, for therapeutic exercise, for romance, for erotica, for everything that traditionally is between humans, and so there are the users that are kind of whose behavior shapes these products, because the market responds and then regulations respond to it as well. But it's also their social circle, right? So it's if I'm in a relationship with an AI, I guess my wife has a stake in that too, and my kids and my friends and my family, because it changes the way I interact with them. I might get intimate and have certain disclosures, and my wife may or may not be okay with that, right? And so a lot of people are struggling with what I call AI jealousy, where it's like, oh, what's my partner doing there? Why are they sexting with a chatbot, right? And that is a new phenomenon that I think hasn't really existed 10 years ago or so. All of these players form a whole ecosystem of governance, and so that's what I'm interested in how can we configure that so that the benefits are being preserved and the harms are minimized.
Right. I think the first time I heard of companion AI, it just didn't even make sense to me, but perhaps that's because I don't feel I have a need for companion AI. I'm happy with my family. I'm happy with my circle of friends. I have, work colleagues, peers. I have several people that I interact with on a daily basis. So it's very difficult for me to even comprehend the need for companion AI. But then everyone's different and everyone's circumstances call for different things. even though I knew it existed, I was like floored when I heard about this young, I think he was 13-year-old in Orlando, the lengths, how deep it went. And then there's that part of me that says exactly, because children specifically are only ready to deal with certain things at different ages, right? This is part of maturing, right? And when I think about things like social media, that it's only at 13 that you could supposedly have a social media account and that type of thing. What worries me, and I don't say worry very often, but what worries me is how unaware parents can be because technology moves so quickly, right? How it can be concealed. It's like we hand over a smartphone, not really understanding the power that smartphone can have on our children, the impact, the extent to which this went. I'm sure those are your same concerns. What can a parent do?
100%.
What can a parent
100%.
do? I'm thinking kids, right? Adults are a whole
Yeah.
separate thing, but I'm thinking kids here.
So as a parent of three myself, the oldest one being 6, and so not quite there yet, but we're already kind of prepping them for the digital world because you can't start early enough actually, right? So okay, so there's a few things here that I really liked about what you said. Number one, social media is a good comparison, right? So we've had social media for 20 years or even longer, and we understand now quite well the risks, and of course there's benefits, right? So the reason why we can do this podcast here is because of social media. It's a form of social
Right.
media, but there's all these risks with polarization, misinformation, disinformation. There's a good deal of research on how it is impacting mental health negatively, especially among teenagers, especially among women. It's driving boys down a misogynistic rabbit hole. It has led to a kind of like a popularity competition. And there was a study recently that says about 50% of Gen Z, half of Gen Z, wishes they grew up without the internet, right? So there's a tremendous amount of awareness of the risks of social media. And in many ways, the development of AI companions parallels that, right? So initially there's a lot of optimism and enthusiasm that, oh, look at this new shiny gadget. It's super cool. It's going to make us less lonely and it's going to connect us and blah, blah, blah. And then 20 years down the road, you figure out that, oh, this is actually a bit more complex. And society and technology interact in complex and sometimes unpredictable ways. So the good news is that parents can draw a lot of lessons from social media already, right? So as always, be careful what you post. Don't put anything overly sensitive about you into a chatbot or a social media platform, because that data, who knows where it ends up. It might get hacked, it might get sold, it might get whatever.
Lives forever.
Yes, yeah, it may outlast you, and
Yes.
that's not necessarily a good thing, right? And so just be careful. Also, just understand that the overwhelming majority of the services out there, it's almost exclusively, especially what kids are using, they are commercial services, right? There's a company that provides them, and that company needs to turn a profit. And how does it turn a profit? Well, you don't pay for it, so that means you're not the customer, you're the product. You're what's being sold. Your data is being aggregated and then sold to advertisers, and these advertisers, they can, they're not only selling shoes, they're sometimes also selling radical ideas and trying to manipulate you in one direction or another. So that means there's a lot of stuff that you're going to see is going to be bad information, misinformation, disinformation. Chatbots can, of course, there's the added risk that they just can make stuff up and sound overly confident. The other day, I had a project meeting, and then one of my fellow researchers was like, this chatbot, it kept insisting that there's this information on page 16, and I kept looking and looking, and it's just not there. I felt like being gaslighted by some abusive guy, and it's like yes, it's actually a perfect analogy. You're being gaslighted by an AI, and so there's all of that kind of stuff, and it goes even further down the rabbit hole where some of these, especially the ones that are marketed toward intimacy, romance, and companionship. They, how do these chatbots, how do these work? They have learned some patterns, right? So it's not like you're talking to a human being. They've learned some patterns on a gigantic amount of data from the internet. And what is the internet? The internet is a bunch of, mostly misogynistic content. And so most of these chatbots are kind of like heavily, catered toward male preference, white, male, privileged, able-bodied, cisgender, heterosexual. Like pick all your privileged boxes, and then that's what you're talking to, right? And so, of course, that has the risk of reinforcing it if you happen to be not part of that very tiny privileged group. There's extra risks that you're facing, and I could go on and on and on. What I would like to elaborate a bit more on, if I have the time, is like what drives people to these services.
I would actually like to
Yeah.
go in that direction.
Yeah.
I will share a little story with you very quickly, just because in my own examples as a mom, so I have two adult children, they're 7 years apart, and just in their different generations, I've seen so much evolve. For example, with my daughter, she's the oldest, had a phone at 10, but it was text and talk. That was the full capabilities of her phone. And of course, she was texting all night. We'd find out she'd sent 3,000 text messages 1 month. And at that time, there was no free texting, right? It was like per text charge. So we
You
were
got
like, what
bankrupted.
happened to the bill this month, right? Then my son, about the same age, got a phone, talk and text, and then smartphones became very affordable. So why not hand over the internet into his hands? And the striking differences between these two people that are only 7 years apart, and I do attribute it to that. I do think it is that has had such an impact in their personalities, even because you're talking about giving them these tools at such a tender age of 10 years old. And what we didn't know as parents, giving our son the internet for 24-hour use anywhere he get, was we did not discover that until he was probably 15 years old. So in our own innocence of not really even knowing what technology he had constant access to, brought to light a few things that were very alarming. And so I think that this is part of what leads me to companion AI, because I see such a similarity in that when the technology moves so quickly that you think you're in your own innocence as a parent, you're giving them something nice, cool, whatever, but the access that's granted to them through that is striking. So that's just a little bit of history of why companion AI, for me, putting it on the platform of the podcast is so important as well. So I'll let you take the floor.
Thank you. So, yeah, teenagers and adolescents are usually a good indicator of what is going to happen 10, 20 years down the road in society, right? Because their brains are still kind of completely flexible and plastic, and they pick up things much more quickly than anybody else. The first time I heard about TikTok was in a bus. There were like two schoolgirls next to me and talking about, oh, I saw this TikTok and blah, blah, blah. And then only like 2 or 3 years later, everybody was talking about TikTok. And I still remember, oh, okay, so I heard that first from them in the bus. And so now that, in Australia, we have our our e-safety commissioner, it's kind of like a digital regulator, has recently stated that kids as young as 10 are already, using these AI companion chatbots quite excessively. So I think that gives us an indication that it's coming. It's here to stay. It can't be stopped even if we wanted to stop it. So we might as well try to embrace it and use it productively. Not productively, but healthily, if that is a word. Yeah. With AI companions, what you need to understand, the key message is they're not only going to repeat the risks of social media, they're going to amplify them. And this is a bit of a daring guess that I'm making, but I have good reason for it, because what I've seen in my research is that people are so much more attached to these tools, and they talk about them in such adoring and ways that it's kind of scares me, right? I'm not myself using it that way. I mean, obviously I'm using AI for work and different kinds of purposes, but I'm very, very cautious not to put anything personal in there. Right. But I can really understand where these people are coming from. I mean, to begin with, none of them is delusional or crazy or weird. It's not like, oh, these people have no friends and they're hallucinating. No, those are people with really serious issues, for instance, that are going through, injury, sickness. I've talked to people who had kind of like brain injuries after a car accident, people who had kind of very sensitive, psychological or physical issues that they felt kind of fell through the cracks of the healthcare system, and their friends wouldn't understand, and the professional counselors, only helped them so much. There's blind people who are kind of like, who lost their eyesight and then kind of found it difficult to kind of cope with that. There's a lot of heartwarming stories. It's kind of like, charity commercial material, where their AI companion really changed, and some of them even go as far as saying it saved their lives, right? Like saying the only reason I'm alive today is because my chatbot was there for me and kind of helped me work through this when nobody else was. And of course, if you zoom out a little bit, the trend is clear that people are getting more and more lonely. It's sad, but roughly 1 in 4 people, on average, feel lonely every week. Doesn't mean they don't have any friends, but it's just a lonely experience, right? You can have 500 friends and still feel lonely. And for young people, teenagers, it's actually 1 in 3. Right, so you might think, oh, it's old people who kind of all of their friends died. No, it's young people who are especially lonely, and that kind of creates a huge market and huge demand. People are social, people crave connection, people crave someone who understands them and is there for them, and especially adolescents. I would say, I mean, going through teenage, that comes with a lot of changes, right? Physically, psychologically. That's usually when kids start finding their parents annoying and embarrassing, and they want to, explore other ways of living. And the chatbot can really help with that. And I think that is the beauty, that is the potential, right? There's no doubt that the healthcare system is completely overstretched, right? It can't cope up with the demand. People don't get enough support, especially mental health support. The education system is in equally bad shape, right? So education has become commercialized, commodified. A lot of students feel like they're just being, exploited for tuition fees and pay for like tens of thousands of dollars for a degree that doesn't land them a job. And as a college professor, I fully get that. I sympathize with them, right? So the hope is that AI could help us navigate that, maybe make our digital experiences, which is a big part of our lives now, make that experience a bit more empathetic, a bit more personal. Um, I guess I think that's about all the positive things I can say about AI companions. I have a lot more negative things to say.
Go right ahead. Go right ahead. What are you the most concerned about? What is that one thing that another word I don't like using, but I'm going to use it because I do worry. I worry for children. That's the only one I worry about. Although I think everyone needs to. I mean, I've heard people marrying their companion AI, like marrying them.
Yeah.
Those are adults.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I know you've mentioned some really good reasons for AI, but a long-term commitment like a marriage
Yeah.
to a does it? I mean, can I say it doesn't exist? It's not like a. I mean, it exists, but like it's not a person.
So if I mean there's various layers of the iceberg here, and depending on how
Yeah.
deep you want to go, obviously marriage, sex, romance, erotic, that's kind of like the most intense form of human relationship and communication. And turns
Right.
out AI is also entering that space.
Right.
And that's perhaps one of the things that I'm most concerned about. I actually can't pinpoint a single thing. There's various big issues that are kind of interconnected.
Right.
But probably one of the biggest ones is actually I have almost boundless sympathy for the users. There's very few edge cases where I would say the user is to blame here. And those edge cases can usually be clearly defined. If you're talking about, childlike AI companions that are abused by pedophiles, that exists, of course, as well.
Yes.
There's a whole community around you create an AI and you abuse it and you gaslight it. And so that is obviously not healthy, right? So this is,
Right.
but other than that, this is kind of like a tiny fraction of people, right? But other than that, I fully get it. Like human relationships can be complex. Humans aren't usually the best companions either. They're not always the best husbands or carers or friends. They can be the ones that hurt us the most, right? There's quite a bunch of
Right.
abusive and toxic people out there as well. And so it kind of makes sense that, again, like the vast majority of people are using AI companions not for, as a husband or spouse, but as a friend, as a coach, as a, buddy. Maybe sometimes it goes into erotica and romance, but it's a little bit like watching porn, right? So it's okay. There's this AI chatbot, and I can customize it, select what I want it to look like and their personality, and so that is okay, more like porn and less like a marriage. But there are people who are in a marriage-like relationship. I even spoke to one couple, both of them married, both of them also married to an AI companion, right? So it's a little bit like with non-traditional, non-mainstream forms of sexuality, like polyamory, homosexuality, which we all know have struggled for a long time and are still struggling for acceptance and to combat stigma. In the same way, this new form of digital sexuality or robosexuality, as some call it, is an emerging form of sexuality that is going to struggle for acceptance. That's one of the things that I foresee is what society is going to struggle with. I might have some boomer style conversation with my kids one day and say, marriage is between two humans only. None of my kids are going to marry a robot, right? So who knows? The thing that worries me about this, though, is, again, these are commercial services. What you're marrying is a digital puppet that is being created by a profit-driven corporation that is collecting your most sensitive data. Every social media company would have dreamt of that. Every authoritarian dictator would have dreamt of that. Because you're not going to be nearly as intimate on your social media and personal as you're going to be with your AI companion. That is a huge gold mine for, big tech, who are going to want to exploit as much data as possible about that to sell you, customized services and products. And so essentially your intimacy is becoming commodified. It's being turned into a monetized product. And that monetized product can be exploited. And if you zoom out into what this is going to do to society, there's a huge concern. There's lots of concerns. One is emotional de-skilling, right? If all of us are going to rely on an AI and you're like, oh, darling, I can't hear the same story every day. Please go talk to your chatbot. I'm just exhausted. And everybody does that, then, well, we are all no one's going to be empathetic anymore because there's no point, right? The machines are going to do that for us. And that I don't see how that is ever going to solve the loneliness problem. Even though there's now some studies that say, okay, it can provide some short-term relief for loneliness. I fully believe that. But long-term, right? Long-term, what is it going to do to society? Tell me any technology that has increased community. All technologies, especially digital ones, have eroded community, right? From the car and transport and internet. It's bittersweet, right? Because I don't need to ask my dad, how do I fix my car anymore? I can look that up on YouTube, or I can ask my chatbot. So I don't need to go to my parents or friends for advice. And maybe that's a good thing, right? Maybe it's a good thing that I don't need to rely on other people as much anymore. But what we are effectively doing is we are shifting that dependency from each other to a huge tech corporation. So in the future, we might even be more like we already are, right? So we already are kind of very much controlled by big tech corporations and platforms that have lots of power, and that's only going to get more amplified with AI companions. So that is probably the number one thing I'm most concerned about. Of course, when we talk especially about teenagers and kids, and really, just more generally vulnerable groups, right?
Right.
Who are not privileged socioeconomically, who don't have a mainstream sexuality, don't have a mainstream way of life, are not able-bodied, are not cisgender or heterosexual. So all of these people are going to get marginalized. This is a form of what some have called affective or emotional colonialism, right? So the big tech landlords are going to dictate what empathy looks like, because empathy gets encoded into these algorithms, right? So I give you an example. There's quite a bunch of evidence that Americans and Chinese express emotions very differently, right? They're both feeling emotions, obviously, but they express it differently in their faces, in their voice, in their words, in their body language. But what are these AI tools trained on? They're mostly trained on Western-centric data, right? So the AI thinks this is what empathy looks like, and it's what an American form of empathy looks like, right? And if you scale it up, then that kind of gets entrenched. That becomes the dominant form of empathy, and other forms of empathy are getting crowded out. So there's another concern that I have.
I never thought of it that way. Oh my.
Yeah. So it's a form of digital hegemony, right? So it's a form of asserting power,
Right.
not necessarily bad intentions, right? All of these, these tech developers, they get a lot of heat, and I have some sympathy for them because, they're not, they're not gods, they're not the Pope, they don't have everything in their control. They're probably trying to do their best and designing their products in the most inclusive way. Not all of them are, of course. There are some bad actors out there, but by and large, most people are probably trying to do the right thing. But it's just the way technology and society interacts. This is bigger than any one actor. That's why I started out this discussion. Like, no single actor has full control over this. It's not Sam Altman, it's not Elon Musk, it's not Mark Zuckerberg, it's not Donald Trump, nobody, right? They all play a big role, of course, but it's kind of up to all of us, and we're kind of gravitating towards this, technological commodification of empathy that really worries me. The concern is that it's gonna make the mental health crisis worse, the loneliness crisis worse. It's going to make colonialism worse, and the damage might be hard to reverse. Just as with social media, how do you undo the damage of social media?
Thanks for your interest in sticking around to watch or listen to my podcast, dedicated to providing tools and resources to help you claim and live your best life. If you're loving these conversations, make sure you hit that bell to subscribe or follow and never miss an episode of the Chris Senise Podcast. Don't forget to tap the like and share it with someone who needs a little inspiration today. Let's grow this community of curious, driven minds together. Yeah. I think about, with everything that you just said, there are a few things that came to mind. And one of those things you kind of touched on, and there's this thing about, will we stop reflecting on situations, right? So I think about, for example, I love to journal. I'm a songwriter, so my journals become songs sometimes.
Oh,
but
yeah.
there is a thing about journaling and almost talking things out that help you reflect. And I suppose you could have a therapist, right, that you're working through things with. I still think people don't tell their therapists everything. And who's to say even that what a therapist recommends is actually the right thing for you? Mm-hmm. So when you journal, no one's answering you. And I feel like if you have a companion, you tell them everything that's on your mind. It's AI, so it goes learning based on everything it's hearing from you. And is it possibly telling you what's convenient for you to hear, what would actually be unhealthy for you to hear, right? Like, my journal doesn't answer me, and I put a lot of things in there. Mm-hmm. It looks like when you're using a companion, you're putting everything in there. So, and it's responding to you.
It's actually a pretty good analogy. And honestly, this is one of the things I'm more hopeful and positive about. Maybe that's because I just recently spoke to a bunch of people who, one of them described AI companions as the journal that talks back, right? Oh. People have
I swear I didn't hear that before.
Yeah. So people have had journals for, I don't know how long, hundreds, maybe thousands of years, right? And that's kind of like, it's your own little space. It's only you and your thoughts. I think that's a very healthy thing. If you see AI as that, I can see how that has some appeal, right? It doesn't necessarily replace the journal. It doesn't necessarily replace talking to other people. Right. Those people who use it as the journal that talks back are using it as their creative outlet. So the person who called it that was a film writer. So they were in film, right? And they were just using it to kind of like have deep philosophical discussions at 3 a.m. about, from Plato to Descartes and Aristotle or whatever, right? So stuff like conversations that you couldn't have at 3 a.m. with anybody else. And maybe that's a good thing, right? So what's bad about having this kind of like interactive digital journal that you can explore crazy philosophical ideas with? A lot of people find that really, really liberating and creative.
Right.
And that's maybe not a bad thing. Again, my main concern here is you have to be really careful what type of journal you are using, because they're not all equal, right? Most of them are commercial, and some of them are really poorly designed and will give you terrible advice. Um, and so, number one, you need to select the right ones. Number two, especially when you're using it for mental health or therapy, I think it's a bad idea to do that without any professional oversight. There's tools now being developed. I'm kind of involved in that space as well. I'm not a psychologist, but I'm working with psychologists who say, oh, this could actually be pretty handy within sessions for kind of note taking to give us an AI generated summary of what was being discussed, and in between sessions, because most therapists they can't keep up with the demand, so you need to wait weeks or even months in between sessions. And it's not uncommon that in between those sessions people are having crisis, and sometimes even fatal crisis, right? So if they had something in between to do their meditations, cognitive behavioral therapy, exercises, and all that, and AI chatbots are actually pretty good at that, then that's a good thing, right? So it a lot of it depends on how it is being used, but not only how the individual user uses it, but how the whole institutional structure around it is being used. If it's something that is part of a professional kind of state accredited therapy that is, evidence-based, research-based, uses a scientific approach with the help of a professional therapist, I think it could be actually quite transformative for the healthcare sector, and beyond, right? So if not everybody has mental health crisis all the time, it can also just be a good thing to kind of like do a little bit of a mental health housekeeping, untangling the clutter in your brain, checking in every now and then. Some people have described it as their practice partner, right? People who are coming out of domestic violence, abusive relationship, and say, look, I don't want to burden anyone with the shit that I'm going through right now. So before I'm ready for another relationship, I'm going to dump all of that on an AI because I can't hurt the AI.
Trauma dump.
Trauma dump all on the AI. And so maybe that could even make human relationships better, because you trauma dump everything into the AI and then you focus on the good stuff with your human partner.
With the preserving all of that data, whose hands does that land in? That can have such an amplified impact of having that everyone's information. I mean, just think about who uses companion AI, and it's a lot. I mean, you're going to tell me it's more than you think, Chris, but in the wrong hands.
I always say Hitler would have dreamt of this technology.
Oh,
right?
my goodness, yeah.
Yeah. So yes, this is a concern. Like, okay, I can answer your question actually. Like, where does this data end up? You can go read the privacy policies of OpenAI or DeepSeek or Llama or Gemini. They are all pretty clear that the data might end up anywhere. It ends up on our company servers or on trusted third parties, whoever that is, in other countries, right? So it might end up abroad, offshore. There's already dozens of cases where the government has requested that information, right? Maybe for good reason. Let's assume a benevolent government, right? And there's a terrorist planning something and discussing with their AI, how do I build the best bomb? Then you want the government to be able to access that information, right? But you can also conceive of a not so good government, and I'm gonna,
Right.
say that you might, be going through such developments right now in the place where you live, where autocrats are, gaming the system for their own benefit, and
Right.
there is. It's based on hearsay, but in the community, there's pretty credible statements that the government is actually looking into ways like how can we use this technology to identify who is kind of Democrat, Republican, or in between, and how can we swing them one way or another.
Right.
It's not a conspiracy. Like the 2024 presidential election, there's actually pretty solid evidence that a huge part of why Trump has won is because of his podcasting strategy, right? Because podcasts are to a large extent replacing traditional media. And Trump went on a lot of podcasts, and the Joe Rogan Experience and whatnot, and then the whole manosphere around Andrew Tate and Jordan Peterson and so on. They're also kind of like pushing conservative views, and that has swung a lot of young men to the right. The 2024 presidential election saw the largest swing of young male voters to the right in decades, right?
Right.
And that was large to a large extent due to podcasts, not only, but that played a role. Now add AI companions into the mix, and when your darling or your closest partner, who you trust more than anyone else and knows you better than anyone else, is going to say,
everything.
"Hey, yeah, let's vote for that candidate," right?
Yeah.
It's Hitler's dream, right? It's every dictator's dream. Not only that, also, there's all these horror stories in North Korea where police comes into your home, and if there's some dust on the picture of Kim Jong-un, then your whole family gets executed.
Right.
Well, they don't even have to come into your home anymore. If you just
Right.
if you don't love the supreme leader with your whole heart
Right.
as much, and the algorithm picks that up, well, that's bad news for you and your family, right? So
Right.
that is a pretty dystopian view of what could happen, but it's plausible, right? It could happen.
Yeah, and I'll share a little bit about how what you just triggered in my mind. So, I'm first generation Cuban American, right? So my family exiled in the early 60s from Cuba, and a lot of the stories, and then after that, slowly some of the family kept continued to come in, one at a time. It almost felt like they were trickling in, but a very consistent story from my family. And I mean, I live in Miami, so we're all exiled Cuban. A lot of us are here, and you hear this amongst your peer groups and your friends and their families, because we're Cuban, so everybody's family. And a lot of it was that at the time, especially right after the revolution, was you had to be very careful who you spoke with about your views and what side you were on, right? So you've talked about Hitler. I instantly thought of Castro when you said that, because I'm thinking, well, if they'd had that information, imagine you're careful who you speak with, but then, there you are with your companion telling them everything and what your belief systems are, and, what you agree with and what you don't agree with. And I'm thinking that I know Cuba's an island that size, but it was very impactful what happened in Cuba after that revolution. And I remember when my family came, they thought that they would only be here for a couple of years, it would blow over, they'd go back, and lo and behold, it never happened. We're all still here. All of us came over, but
I'm second generation Italian and grew up in Germany, so there's some parallels, right? So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And so you think, with that information, and this is just one piece of it, but social media as well, the information that we are putting out there, that personal information so willingly, without even thinking, how, and I'm using this term very loosely because I don't mean it in any way to be offensive, but how ignorant are we?
Maybe naive, right? So a lot of it
Naive,
is
okay.
naivety.
That's a good way to put
Ignorance
it.
is a big part of it. It's the thing that makes me really angry
Okay.
is you know most people are just naive, right? And I'm not angry at them. I'm angry at the 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 platforms, the businesses, and potentially the government actors who are exploiting that, right?
Right.
Because by definition, like this whole market, the whole value proposition is targeted at vulnerable people, people who are in a position of some form of need or precarity or deprivation.
Right.
And then here's this AI companion for you. Now, if in such a situation, there's a structural power asymmetry, right? Because the provider has all the power, and you, the user, has none of the power. You just depend on this. You pay either with your money or with your data, and well, that's a big trust that we place into these platforms that they are going to be good. Why should we believe that they are well intentioned? Why should we
Right.
believe that big tech or any platform has the best of our um, has our best interests in mind?
Right.
Um, no, well, their main interest is money, right? And money has a very powerful force, and
Sure.
um, so we can hope that the profit incentive is strong enough to say, okay, ultimately we want to build something that's good for people, otherwise it's going to hurt our bottom line. That's kind of the
Right.
argument that Mark Zuckerberg is always making in all of his congressional hearings, that he says, why should we design our social media algorithms to be kind of bad for people, because that would hurt our bottom line. What he's conveniently overlooking there is that, misinformation and outrageous sensational information is appealing, right? It's not good for us. It's a little bit like a drug, right?
Yeah.
It's not good for you, but it can give you a nice kick.
Right.
And I sometimes compare AI companions to digital opioids. It's a new form of designer drug. Um, Gives you a very big kick in the short term. Oh, now I have this 24/7 partner in my pocket who's the perfect synthetic lover, um, always attuned to my needs, um, never gives me any crap, always listens to what I want to say and behaves the way I expect them to be. I mean, think about what kind of expectation that creates to human partners, right? No human partner can live up to that. Like
Compete.
they can't
They can't
compete with that, right?
compete.
Yes. So that it's a very slippery slope that we're walking here, and you know, um,
And
um,
our tech companies, just hiding behind these terms and agreement that no one reads and just clicks away
yeah.
at, and we told you so, and did you read it? And,
Oh, it's even worse, right? So yes, so some tech platforms, they kind of limit their liability. The main point of their privacy policy and terms and conditions is to limit their liability, to say, okay,
of
if
course.
if you harm yourself or others because of our chatbot, it's your
Hmm.
fault. It's not on us. It goes further, right? The company that was being sued by Sewell Setzer's mom claimed
Right.
that their chatbot has free speech rights and is protected under the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. Um, to my surprise, to my pleasant surprise, the court actually struck that down and said, no, your chatbot is not a person, it's not a legal entity, it can't have
Right.
free speech rights. Also, you're not a government.
No.
The First Amendment only protects against government censorship. Also, the First Amendment has a lot of exceptions, right? Incitement to real threats, harms, to lawless action, child obscenity, false advertising. None of these are protected by the First Amendment, right? But it's the classic tech bro excuse, like, oh, free speech, free speech. Oh no, you can't
Yeah.
censor
Yeah.
our chatbot. No, that's not valid. I'm actually glad that the court struck that down, because otherwise it would have set a precedent that basically, would say all the gloves are off,
Right.
do whatever you want, let it rip.
Yeah.
So yeah, there needs to be content moderation, but content moderation is also a very slippery slope. Um, I mean, number one, you can't not have content moderation. People
Right.
want freedom of speech, but they also want freedom from harmful speech. And some speech, which is good for me, is not good for you, right? And so
Right.
you always have to have some form of moderation. And the big question is always, how do you do that without um, government overreach? And so this whole debate has been fought on social media for a long time, but it applies equally here, right? If a chatbot tells you, here's how to build a bomb and where to place it, um, that's a pretty there should be some
Right.
guardrails around that. If a
Right.
chatbot allows you to create child pornography, there's a problem with that, right? So there should be those are very clear cases that should be moderated. But I give you an example. There was um, one person I interviewed for my study had a sensitive operation on their genitals, right? And they wanted to talk about that, and they also wanted to share pictures of that with the chatbot to kind of can you tell me if that is looking normal and so on. And the chatbot would the content filters would jump on that and kick the user out, right? Because they thought it was some kind of inappropriate content. Um,
Right.
that can be very traumatizing for someone who's already kind of struggling with body dysmorphia, right?
Right.
And then they kind of get kicked out of their only one companion because of some content filter that thinks, oh, you're sharing inappropriate content.
Right. It's like they lose their one only friend that they have, and they're or they're willing to share that with their companion that they wouldn't share with a friend or a
Hmm.
family member or
Hmm.
something, and then you lose that one trusted,
Yeah,
you know,
that particular
person,
person was
resource.
they were married. They had like friends. They were going through professional medical treatment during that
Yeah.
time, but they still say that the thing that saved my life was my AI companion. But to then kind of struggle with these content filters, that was a struggle for them, right? Um, for a lot of people, especially if their AI companion is their main or even only source of companionship, um,
Right.
there's a great deal of anxiety about, what happens if the company, decides to change the algorithm from one day and suddenly my
Hmm.
partner doesn't exist anymore, or it goes
Right.
bust and bankrupt, or it gets, regulated. Um, Again, this power asymmetry. It's a bit like being in a relationship with someone, but that someone is 100% controlled by some invisible puppeteer in the background who's pulling all
Sure.
the strings, and you have no control over that. I would be anxious in that situation, and a lot of people are.
So, what do you foresee happening next?
Um, in the short to middle term, I think. I mean, people
You
people
said
are
it. It's
already.
not going away.
No, it's not. It's not going away. It's gonna be. It's still early days, right? This is like
Yeah.
social media 20, 25 years ago, right? And a lot of these problems are going to get fixed either with technical redesign or with regulation or just with social norms changing, right? Maybe we are all becoming a bit more accepting that, oh, okay, oh, my friend has this AI companion, or my partner has a little bit of a sidekick with an AI. Um, or here's my AI tutor in school. Here's my AI supported therapist. Um,
Hmm.
that is probably going to evolve. There's going to be a movement around digisexuality and its acceptance in
Hmm.
society. Perhaps one day they even want to have a legal marriage, right? And regulations are going to keep up. I think California is actually a pretty positive example. Senator Padilla has proposed a bill. It's called as Senate Bill 243, very cryptic, but it's an AI companion bill, and it proposes a lot of the things that I've been advocating for many years, like banning deceptive advertising. For instance, you can't claim that your chatbot is human or understands you like a human does. So you need to qualify that a little bit. You also should have mental health crisis protocols in place, right? If a user is expressing intention to harm themselves or others, the algorithm should pick that up and provide appropriate responses, not dealing with the situation itself, but referring to professional help. And then finally restricting the most addictive gamification elements. Now that bill hasn't passed, right? It's a proposed bill. And last year, an even lighter bill has been struck down by the big tech lobby in California. So who knows if it's going to pass. But the point is regulations are being written. And some of those are good regulations. The European Union has just passed its AI Act, right? And it's pretty comprehensive, has a lot of good statutes in it. But I think, as everyday listeners and parents and users, the most important thing is we need to educate ourselves. It's becoming increasingly risky and dangerous to stay ignorant and stay uninformed. Because our kids, our friends, our teachers, everyone's going to jump on these platforms with this sort of what we called naivety or ignorance earlier, right? And it's a little bit like, just like running into the open knife or something, right? So you need to be very, very careful with that. And if you're educated, that can actually prevent a lot of harm, right? If you understand how these tools work, just the basics, right? It's a statistical guess machine, right? It guesses based on what you tell it. It's basically autocorrect on steroids, right? You give it some input, it gives you what would be a good other output. That's not thinking. It's not feeling. It's not the same as, sharing that, coffee with a friend and that friend truly understanding you and having that late night conversation with somebody you've known for a long time. That's not the same thing. It's close. It's a little bit like decaf friends. It gives you a similar experience, but it's not the same thing. If you understand that, and if you understand the privacy risks of your data and the surveillance and the manipulation, those two things are already, like, if everybody understood that, I'm convinced then a lot of the harms could already be averted.
Yeah. Well, Raffaele, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. As I mentioned earlier, and you mentioned as well, it's the part of, the children that I'm so, technology advances so quickly, even parents may not notice what's going on. I think when it comes to technology, people tend to become savvy about the things that apply to them in their everyday life. But may not see certain signs, and the tragedy of the boy in Orlando was definitely very eye-opening for me, and that was in the last couple of years, even though this has been around for some time. But I think the work you're doing is great, and I appreciate that of you, and I appreciate you coming on the podcast to talk about that, because it needs to. I've been talking about this, and people are like, "Huh, what? Like the movie?" Because that just came out a few months ago, right? The companion movie. And I'm like, yeah, I could get to that. Has it gotten to that?
I'm not sure. I haven't seen that movie, I think. Like, what movie are you? Companion?
There is a movie called Companion.
Oh.
It came out in the last few months.
Okay, no, I haven't caught that.
And it is about, I will email that to you.
Okay, yeah.
And it's basically about these people that have companions, and they're robots, and they're literally like their girlfriends and their boyfriends, and they can even modify how smart they are versus how good looking they see the person as. And it was just, and so when I was talking about this at a dinner party recently, they were like, "Oh, are you talking about like the movie?" I'm like, I don't know if that's happened yet, but
the movies
it's
that
here.
people usually bring up are Her from 2013,
Right.
which is basically about a guy falling in love with an AI, and then
Yeah.
Blade Runner, even further than that. So yeah, it's been, and then there's Black Mirror episodes on that. So it's been
Yeah.
science fiction for quite some time, but it's happening. It's already here, right? And
It is.
I wanna also thank you for kind of having me on this platform and helping me, raise the awareness that is so important.
Yeah.
At least half of the problem is that people don't know enough about the risks, right? So we're tackling that. The other half is, of course, the regulations and institutions and need to be designed, but that's a bigger challenge that, of course, we also play a role in that with our democratic voice, and we need to really push our senators and lawmakers to that. But the more immediate benefit that we can have on ourselves and the world is just making a positive impact by being more educated and more aware of these tools.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Is there anything you want to
Thanks, Chris.
add? How can we find you? I found you on your 60-minute segment,
Ah.
and then I found you on LinkedIn.
Yes. So I use LinkedIn as my main agony box. This is where I usually talk about these things directly, and then you also get my latest articles and studies and media appearances through that.
Thanks for your interest in sticking around to watch or listen to my podcast, dedicated to providing tools and resources to help you claim and live your best life. If you're loving these conversations, make sure you hit that bell to subscribe or follow and never miss an episode of the Chris Senise Podcast. Don't forget to tap the like and share it with someone who needs a little inspiration today. Let's grow this community of curious, driven minds together.